This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are designing our future. Hola, I am Joe Pardavila, and my guest today is DeAngela Burns-Wallace. DeAngela is a nationally respected executive, former U.S. diplomat, and CEO of the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. Her career spans diplomacy, higher education, state government, and philanthropy. In her new book, Made for This, Lessons in Leadership, Legacy, and Living Unapologetically, she reflects on leading with conviction, confronting identity and race, and choosing purpose over comfort. Angela, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for joining me today. And I want to start our conversation talking about grandmothers, because you write in your book how important an influence she was on you, on how to treat other people. And for me, my grandmother was essentially an extension of my mom. Like, my mom had to go to work when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I tell the story to folks, Angela, when I discovered that my mother was no longer taking me to school, I freaked out. Like, I literally was like soiling myself so I wouldn't have to go to school. I was doing, because I was so attached to my mother, but my grandmother stepped in and took great care of me. She probably made me the man who I am today, as equal as my parents are. So tell me about her influence on you and the ripple effects it's had throughout your career and journey.
So, when I think about my granny, she was just a cornerstone to us growing up. It's one of those individuals that sometimes you don't even realize the power that they have in your life until they're gone, right? But my granny was an anchor, but not just to our family, but to the community. She was that person that if you needed a meal, if you needed help with your, rent, if you needed a ride to, church or to work, she would either do it or she'd make that phone call and make sure that someone else did it for you.
Mm.
And the way that we came up, every holiday, we were at my grandmother's house. Every holiday, we were on that porch in her backyard. I remember picking tomatoes and green beans out of her backyard, and I thought everybody did that with their grandmother. But that was her teaching us her love for food, her love for people, her love for family. And when she said family, she meant any and everybody who was in your circle. And most importantly, she meant your job was to make sure you were taking care of family and other people. If you had more, and it might just be a little bit more, it didn't matter. It was your job to take care of each other. And so I think back to growing up and just everything that made me smile, made me laugh, and sometimes made me cry, right?
Yeah.
My granny was at the core of that. And that kind of led into, like you, my parents, my dad, my mom, and everything that they taught me, my brother, and now the things that I hope to teach my son too.
Oh, that's great. And it's funny, you described something that I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and this idea of community, and sort of like, I want to put in brackets, old school community, how everyone was looking out for one another. So a friend of mine, she's a millennial mom. She has like 3 young children, all under the age of like 5 or 6. And I said to her, like, and she had difficulty with pregnancy. So it was a struggle for her to have children. So when she finally did it, she felt guilty to tell other people how hard it was to be a mother. And I say, well, why do you think it's harder for you to be a mother than your mom, for example? And she said, my mom had a community. Like, if one of the moms was sick or not feeling well, another mom would step in and take the kids to school, or another mom would prepare cupcakes for another mom, or substitute that in for any other adult in the community. And
Mhm.
there is something. And when she said that to me, I'm like, it's true. Like, if you don't have that old school community, again, we call it old school just because it's very much a generational thing. We don't see it as much today. But tell me about that community around you and how important it was and how different it is now that you're a mom.
Yeah. So that community was everything. And again, like looking back, and it's one of the things when write a book like this, you look back and the reflection is sometimes it's a little kind of you're like, oh, I didn't even realize like how intense that was. But my community, started with my core family and my parents and my brother and my granny, aunts, uncles, cousins, but then it rippled out to our church, those that we worked with and lived around in our greater community. But that community was everything. I used to joke that, I grew up here in Kansas City And, I have tons of cousins on both sides of my family, and we couldn't go anywhere. So me and my girlfriends were trying to go somewhere we weren't supposed to be. A cousin would definitely be there and say, "What are you doing here?" Right? But it was also, if you showed up somewhere and it was a member of your church and you knew how you were supposed to show up and engage and as they would say, like, act right, right? Because that community was there both to support you, but also to guide you. Guide you in terms of how you show up, guide you in the places that you're supposed to be. But they're also the people who would open your doors. When I went away to college, my member of our church who would become, one of my godmothers, at the time worked for an airline here in the region and helped me get back and forth to school. And because and I wasn't her daughter, but it was, hey, one of ours has to go back and forth to California a couple of times a year. We weren't used to that. We didn't really have funds for that, but she made sure I got home for Thanksgiving. She made sure I got home for Christmas. That community was built in, right? It was proactive and reactive, but it surrounded you in so many different directions. As I think about now, it is different. I think that we have to be a little bit more intentional to build that community. And I have taken different things and thought about this for my son. And so I look for opportunities to create that community for him. I actually have the luxury and pleasure for my parents to live with us. They moved in with us when I moved back to the region a number of years ago, just to be able to balance being that, single mother and that professional, head of household. Instead of, me having to, them run across town to pick him up from soccer if I had to work late or if I was traveling for his, system to be a little bit off, going back and forth, having them in the home has been tremendous because it meant both their lives and his lives were uninterrupted when I was creating the interruption. And so because of that, I've created kind of a mini of that community, kind of that intergenerational with my parents being here, my son being here. And I can say during COVID, we didn't know what was going to happen, but to have my family in one household, not to have to worry about my parents, to be able to walk downstairs and make sure they're okay and getting everything they need. But I will say in that greater community, we just have to have a different intentionality now. So the organizations that we become a part of so that my son can be a part of a community of peers and I can be a part of a community of moms is an organization like Jack and Jill of America, where mothers come together for our children and we create programming where our kids are together monthly and sit down and talk and do fun things and do learning activities. And so sometimes it's the intentionality. I don't think we've lost community. I think we have to be more intentional about creating it and making sure it's sustained for our kids.
And a difference from that generation to this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the mobile nature of people nowadays. I remember growing up, people born, lived, and died in the same area.
Yes.
And now people are all over the place, and for good reason, for
Yes.
careers, for
Yes.
for way of life. So they
Yep.
find a way. But I live down in the Charleston area, and I often joke that no one's actually from Charleston. Like everyone came here for like I would say they came here for school estate or they came here for a man or woman estate. That's essentially it. So when I someone who was born in Charleston, I'm like, oh my God, it's like seeing like a rare bird. I'm like in the wild, like wow. So I think that intentionality plays a key part in the fact that I'm sure many people in your old school community have probably gone to other places, and then you have new people coming into community. So it's identifying those people that fit into what your idea of a community is.
And you tap on something that I think for me is even greater. That mobile community means my son's community isn't just in this, 20 block radius. So, one of his godmothers lives in Atlanta. And last summer, her and her husband, when I was traveling, was like, send them to us. Just put them on the plane. And I was like, send you, and they have three daughters. And I was like, you just want me to send the boy? And they were like, send the boy. Like, and he spent a week with them and had a blast, right? And so I think the beauty now of that mobile community is that we actually can have that greater community. And sometimes it's not in our backyard, but it's still a part of your ecosystem. And it might be in Atlanta, or it might be in California, or it might be, we have friends, that live overseas that we have visited as well. And so I actually think it's kind of a fun opportunity to redefine what that community looks like and get our kids exposed differently. But it also, I don't know, as a mom, it makes me breathe a sigh of relief, right? That that community exists and that it's bigger than just a 20-block radius.
That's great, good stuff. You talked about church, and you write about how faith was important to you. And it's funny, I've read thousands of leadership books over the last 5, 6 years doing this, but rarely have I ever seen someone talk about how they received their first leadership training on the ground at a church. And you talk about Paradise Missionary Baptist Church. So tell me about the idea of leadership and sort of like the early that's sort of like the seeds of your leadership journey starting there. And I know it's obvious, like obviously moral compass and stuff like that, but
Mhm.
tell me about the idea of you learning how to be a leader at church.
So being a leader at church, I think about when I was growing up, and parts of like is my mom and my granny, but our church. And I was talking with a friend, and when they read that chapter, they were like, "Oh my goodness, I remember being on the usher board," right? But we have the opportunity to do things in the church, right? Not just go to church and when you talk about like that moral compass and the values, yes, we know that that's ingrained as you move through faith. But one of the things that I talk about and that I remember so distinctly was that once a month it was Youth Sunday. And Youth Sunday wasn't just about carting out the youth and saying, like, here they are, they're going to sing. We were responsible for all aspects of church. So we had to open the church, we had to take the offering, we had to like give all of, the announcements and, as well as the singing and ushering everyone into their seats and folding the programs properly so that they were all aligned and crisp, right? And for each of those things, there were adults that served in those capacities, usually in the church. So there was the senior usher board, and they guided us, the junior usher board, on how to put our gloves on and have our name tag in place and how you approach a person. But those things, when you look back, we're modeling, right? How do you engage? How do you lead an organization? How do you stand up in front of 100, 200 people and speak at a podium, right? Those were the types of things that we learned. And then there was convention. So I don't know about you, but before I went to like summer camp or anything like that, we went to church convention. And so but at church convention, it's where I actually learned Robert's Rules of Order. We would be in committees and we would have these assignments we had to do, but they would teach us like how to run a meeting, how to get up and present at the end of your committee, your outcomes in front of the Congress, which would be, almost 1,000 other kids like at this convention. And we were in big convention halls. We were in, large hotels with convention rooms. But when you think about it, in each of those places, it was giving us an opportunity to test different things, to learn how to lead, to learn how to engage and show up. And alongside us was always those adults, right? Showing us, telling us, guiding us, directing us. And so when I started to think about where did I learn to public speak, when I started to think about where did I learn to kind of summarize and write up work that I was doing, when I thought about where was the first time I had a group of individuals that I was responsible for training them, teaching them, and then directing them, it was when I was president of the junior usher board at Paradise Missionary Baptist Church.
Wow, that's great. And do you still see that now? We talked about how things have changed from when you were a kid with your family and your community to now how you are with your child and your community. Do you still see a lot of those strong bonds within the church where they are encouraging young people to be more involved and take leadership? What are you seeing on the ground now as a difference of what it was when you were a kid?
Yeah. So I would say that again, this is kind of one of my themes you're going to hear is that intentionality. I have looked for, and we have, moved church homes a couple of times looking for pieces of that. And so I think it may show up a little bit differently. Again, when you think about this generation, how they engage. But I do think that our churches still have those opportunities for our youth to come together, to bring them together, to create opportunities where they are learning and building, and maybe not, the level of the conferences, but that's where, again, you look for those other types of organizations where your children can engage and get those opportunities. And so we are a part of an organization that does do a teen youth leadership conference every other year. And they have, an oratory competition. They have an art competition. And again, getting our teens just to kind of do these activities and see what that feels like. How do you submit your work? How do you submit, make your own speech and stand up there and deliver that and then receive awards for it and feedback. So I think when we were growing up, for me, it was in the church and it was just a cornerstone of our community. I think now the beauty is that you can find it in many different places. And so sometimes it's in the church, sometimes it's in a cultural organization, sometimes it's in a community group or through a community center and the activities that they deliver. So I actually, look for those different opportunities for my son to engage, but also to expose other children in some of the work that we do on a regular basis. So it's different, but it's still there.
Awesome. All right. We for the last 15 minutes we talked about how great your childhood is. It was rainbows and unicorns, as the kids.
Well,
In the book, you talk about confronting racism during your senior year of high school. Um, and I know sometimes when people do memoirs like this, it's always the hardest to tell the hard parts of your life. We always talk about the successes, and it's great to talk about all the great things that. But the shitty things that happen, part of my French, are sometimes really hard to go back to. So tell me about what it was like to sort of having to go back to your memory well and look back at that day and those interactions you had in high school. Tell me about what that was like to relive.
so what that was like. It was interesting. When I started to write that section, I think the hardest part was that, this was over X number of years ago, right? And I've seen many things. I've gone through many things. But to go back to that moment, you still feel what you felt on that day. And I think part of it was because it was the first, or, just I was so young, and seeing it and feeling it in an environment where I felt comfortable and safe. I'm a senior, I'm on student government. I've been a leader at this school since the moment I walked through the doors. I'm getting ready to graduate. I have this bright future. Like, I'm top of the class. I'm the example of all things that, this school was like. I'm on billboards, across the city, like representing the school and diocese, for, encouraging other students and families to join this environment. And so when I started to rewrite it, I actually shared it with a handful of good friends that I still have in my life, that we all went through it together. Because I was afraid. I said, Am I remembering this wrong, y'all? Was it this heavy?" I said, "Am I, overlaying how I think about and how I've experienced issues since then?" And each one of them, as they read it and came back to me, said, "Wow, D, yeah, I forgot some of this," right? They're like, and not necessarily forgot it, but maybe I think locked away some of how that felt, right? But each of them validated, no, that's how it felt. That's how I experienced it as well. I think when I look back, and I think I even say in there, shortly after that, as graduation and other things came on, I kind of moved through it, right? I was graduating, so I wasn't in the environment much longer. But I realized when I walked into my next environment, I think I was a little hesitant in some spaces, right? Like anticipating, is something going to happen? Um, should I expect something to happen? And That happens, but you hope that it doesn't, right? You hope that you can move into an environment and build the trust and create the space, and that you don't always walk into an environment expecting the racism or the sexism or the ism, right, to manifest. But I do know that for a while, I walked into environments almost braced,
Mm.
right, for it. So it it w it wasn't the easiest thing to write.
If you don't mind indulging me here, so I'm curious because you described this very incredible like childhood. Like it seemed like you had such a great family, great community. You pro and I don't mean to insinuate, but it almost seemed like you during that journey, like you never really felt like the hard hammer of racism. Like
Yeah,
you may have been aware, but like you weren't experiencing it until that moment in your senior year of high school. What happens when that occurs? Because again, I've never had to experience this. I've but I wonder, like, does it come as surprise, or are you like, oh, that's what everyone's been talking about? That's what when people talk about, that's what they're like. What were you feeling in the moment of? Was it like unexpected? Like, I'm just because I know for a lot of people, like if they're ingrained in a community and don't have to experience certain things, regardless of
yeah.
color. But then when but you hear like the stories and you hear people talk about it, and then when it happens to you, you're like, oh, that's what people have been talking about all this time.
Mm. So I think you start with surprise, right? Because it's like, "No, that's that's not what's going on here. Like, that can't be what I think it is," right? Unfortunately, it then moves very quickly to anger, right? Because you're like, "What? What is going on here? This is not what should be going on here. This is it's not right," right? And then it moves into spaces of hurt, fear. Yeah, right? And then you waver back and forth to anger. You do.
Form you going forward. Like you mentioned the fact that actually, I know the word trauma gets thrown around a lot, but obviously there were some traumatic scars there that left with you that made you guarded.
Yeah,
Did you then have to, using your word intentionality, did you have to intentionally turn off that wall when you came into experiences, or was it something that you had to grow to be like, hey, not everyone's going to be an a-hole, not everyone's not like, how did you go about, because you obviously went on to have this incredible leadership career,
mhm,
but it sounded like you had walls up early on because of what you experienced.
yeah. So I think it's a little bit of both and, right? I know that my walls probably came up and down, and I think you see it in some of my stories, right? A little bit more protective or leaning in. What I will say is, leaving Kansas City in that first environment I landed in at Stanford, I was immediately surrounded by and share some of the mentors, faculty, and other students that I felt understood my story, that I felt understood, my identities and like, learning my identities. Because I mean, at 18, 20, you're still finding who you are and how you define yourself and what that looks like and how you show up. And so I will say, not immediately, but very quickly, that environment pulled me into a space where I began to learn how to navigate, how to feel very comfortable in who I was, the identity I was building, the realities of just what it looked like to move through my world in a professional way, in an academic way, and then in a personal way. And so I think you grow over time. I think those walls, I don't know that they ever come all the way down, but you learn how to pull them down so that you can be present, that you can, um, show up the way that you want to and not be defined by what others expect. "Oh, you have to show up this way," or always question yourself, "Do I have to show up this way because I'm a woman, because I'm a person of color, because I'm young?" In my career, I started to move really quickly, very, very fast. In many rooms, the closest person in age to me was 10 or 12 years older, right? So sometimes you'd walk into a space and you didn't know if it's because you was young, you were a woman, a person of color, or all three wrapped in a bundle. Uh, and so you begin to say, I'm gonna use that bundle and use it as my superpower and not see it as that barrier or that block, or not allow other people to use it in that way either.
I mean, this connects so beautifully to the themes we've been talking about family, community, and faith, because I wonder if you didn't find that community in Stanford after experiencing what you did in high school, can you imagine how you would have turned up? Because
No.
and again, this is where I talk about like this lack of community now and people lack of connection. I wonder what DeAngela Burns-Wallace would have turned out like if maybe you went to another community where you experienced those same things. So
Yes.
it's amazing how you just rooting yourself in a place where you felt comfortable. You were able to let those walls go up and down a little bit. But
Yeah.
do you ever think about the fact like if you never found that community and you were stuck living in like a lot of the pain and anger you were living with when you're in high school to then, I mean, it is amazing what happens when people can find their community.
But and that for me is a piece of, I think, one of the threads that I try to pull through in the book is that I just didn't find it, right? There were individuals that made sure I connected to it. There were individuals that created opportunities that lifted me and put me in those places. There were groups and others that I was surrounded by that were going through it with me, and we came together and we learned and we grew together. And so that is why for me it's really important that we think about, as we move through our career and sit in different seats, we've been through certain things and you can see that generation behind you, that leader that's coming up, that peer is going through certain things. How do we use that opportunity and share? How do you create space? And then as you get even more senior in your leadership, where you actually are that senior leader that is creating environment, how do you stop and make sure that you are creating that type of environment so that sometimes you maybe don't have to worry that someone is pulling someone up, because you're ensuring that the environment that the people are walking into creates what is needed. So that's a piece for me. It's the, I don't know, like, to those who much is given, much is required, or, all of those types of
Yeah.
phrases. But it is a thing of, I didn't just happen upon that environment and like it just, oh, right? It was individuals who saw me and said, "Hey, you should go talk to this person. Hey, here's this opportunity, and I want you to go to that and understand what that is. Hey, I need you to be in this environment. I know you may not understand, but I know that it is a good place for who you are and what I see in your potential." How do we then turn those opportunities around and then share them, create them, design them for that next leader, that next generation, our children, our friends? How do you do that? Because it's not just the reaching all the way back or behind. Sometimes it's reaching to the side, right? It's that peer that's right there alongside you that you have an opportunity that you want to make sure that they have as well.
That's great. And so that you went on to have this brilliant career as an executive, U.S. diplomat, CEO of the Kauffman Foundation. But that all started with the education piece. And if there's anyone, if anyone knows anything about you, DeAngela, is you love education. Stanford, Princeton, Penn, not some pretty shabby schools. I know you could have done better, DeAngela, I'm sure. But tell me about this love of education.
So I was telling someone the other day, I was doing a talk, and I said, I was that kid, in like preschool, kindergarten that like packed their backpack with all their supplies and like set it by the front door, was like ready to go. And I said, y'all, that never left. Okay. Like I love a good office supply store to this day. I was like, I like the notebooks and the pens and all those things. But part of it is, I don't know where exactly it came from, but I love learning. I love seeing new things. I love exploring new things. And again, had people along my path, including my dad, who was always like, if you follow your education, if you get that education, it can't be taken from you, right? That knowledge is yours. And as I would move through, and particularly in the higher ed institutions, I was then told, not only is that knowledge yours, but you actually can be the creator of new knowledge. And that was a game changer when it became not only can I consume knowledge, but that I can create it. I can be a part of actually creating new ideas, new thoughts, introducing people. And so it really has never left me. No matter what environment I've been in, I want to learn more. I want to ask questions. Sometimes that can drive my bosses crazy. I know it did. You're right. Because I would always ask the why. Why are we doing this? So what does that matter? Like, what's the impact that we want to have? Because I needed to understand, right? And so that just carried with me. And so in every role, in every opportunity, it really was this fire to learn more, know more, but I think it was driven by because I wanted to do more. Not just learning for the sake of learning, but then how do we take this learning and have impact? How do we take this learning and do something different? How do we take this learning and share it with others? And so I don't know that I ever thought I'd have a career actually in higher education, but when it came along, I mean, it was just ideal because it was like leveraging all these things back into the space and being that person that others were for me when I walked into higher ed. But the love of learning, I mean, to this day, I read, I write, but I read everything and I read all kind of things. And I love just consuming, but I also love talking to people. You can learn so much. I had some of the most fascinating conversations in my entire life in taxi cabs in China with taxi cab drivers where I was trying to speak my Mandarin, understand them, learn about the country, they learn about me. Like those were some of the most fascinating conversations that I have ever had. So also pushing ourselves to remember that learning doesn't always happen in a classroom. It doesn't always happen in a book. But I just love to learn. And I just think it's fun. And I just have to say at my core, yeah, I'm that nerd. It's okay. I embrace it.
Yeah, embrace it, and you should. And so, a lot of your work today deals with reimagining equitable economic mobility for all. Um, and as you know, for whatever reason, there's some words that set people off. I never thought in my life the word equity would be so controversial, but
Yeah,
apparently it is. So, tell me about the idea of working in this space,
yeah,
doing good work, but also having to deal with the fact that some people don't like that you're involved in this line of work. Tell me, because I think at its surface, I think we can all agree that's a good thing, but there are parts of the country that don't think that. Tell me what
yeah.
it's like for you to work within that space.
So, the beauty of sitting in the space of philanthropy that I do now, after having a career in federal government, state government, and higher education, is really that I'm able to leverage all of those resources, those networks, those experiences into doing this work. And so one of the ways that we approach this work is really about taking the sting or the connotation out of the words. Because when you say equity, the reality is that people understand that differently. And that's where some of the conflict and the challenge can come from. Because if I'm looking through a particular lens, equity can feel like something is being taken away from me to be given to someone else. For someone else, equity can just simply mean, wow, I'm given an opportunity to step into a place where then I can prove or I can do what I need to do to advance, right? So the way we approach our work is really about understanding the current conditions in the environments, in the neighborhoods, in the communities that we serve. And what we know is that across the area, let's say our region, because we do fund regionally, nationally, locally, but across our region, you have individuals that have high degree attainment and individuals that have low degree attainment. We also know that that is correlated to their ability to earn a higher level of income, own a home, right? Have savings. So the work that we do is how do we create a space where those individuals that sit lower on in those areas have access to opportunities to allow them to grow, to gain. right? And with that, it is not about necessarily taking one from the other, but how do you remove barriers that allow those individuals to have greater access? How do you create greater access to training opportunities? How do you create better access to educational opportunities, K-12, higher ed, 2-year, 4-year, getting credentials, right? Some of that is financial, some of it is information, right? And so the work that we do is we talk about gap closing, right? Creating opportunities for those that maybe did or did not have access to those opportunities, didn't have awareness of those opportunities, didn't have the preparation to step into those opportunities at a natural point. And in doing so, we hope that that work lands with an understanding of, particularly when you do that in a region, that when that region is stronger, when individuals in that region have the ability to access jobs at a certain wage level, to own homes, that they are stronger in their civic engagement, that they are paying taxes into that community, that they are active in decisions that impact that community. And so at the end of the day, that there is a strength and a benefit to the community in a broader way, right? That's what we have approached our work and really, again, not sitting in the definition of a word, but showing people how the work manifests, showing people how the work impacts their neighbor, impacts the zip code next to them, and impacts their larger community. We think that we're having success. We've done this work for almost 60 years. We're celebrating, the foundation is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So for us, and given our founder, it's not new. We have always done the work in this space around closing gaps, creating access, and not necessarily just saying we're giving someone something, but it's more so, how do you create an opportunity for someone to do the things that they naturally can do? So it's not taking from, it's not offering a handout, but it is removing barriers so that individual has their own control over their future. And that's how we approach it. Some may still disagree and maybe not understand it, but I do believe that the power of this work is seeing the individual and then seeing how that individual, that family, that community can truly control their own economic future.
That's great. And so I always wrap up these conversations, DeAngela, taking folks behind the dedication of the book. You dedicate the book to a couple people, but I want to point out that you dedicate first to your son, Xavier. You are my joy, motivation, inspiration always. Continue to shine brightly and walk your own path. In your eyes, I see the future and it is bright. Why was it important to dedicate this book to Xavier?
Ah, my son is my pure joy, right? He just is. And in him, you see everything that is possible. And to tell my story is to lay the foundation for his story. So for me, this was as much for each and every leader that is out there as it was for him. I had him read the book, and when we were going through editing, and I said to him, he's 16, 17, and he's a boy, and usually the sentences you get out of them is, "Huh? Yeah. Okay." That's it, right? And so I told him, "Read the book. Here are some sections that I encourage you to pay attention to. Is there anything you want me to change? Anything you want me to take out?" He sent me the most beautiful email that had more than one sentence. And he said, "Mom, your story is amazing. You're an inspiration. Like, I'm proud of you. Like, they're gonna love it. You don't have to change a thing." That right there, no matter how many reviews I get, no matter how many books are sold, none of that. That that was the moment. And so it's for him. It's all for him. And I'm excited about what's for him and what he and his generation will be able to do for our community, our country, the world. Uh, they they are our future. And when I tell you our future is bright, sit down and talk to a young person. Sit down and see how they see the world and what they're doing and what the true possibilities are, because it will make you smile. It will warm your heart. And actually, for those who have been in this game for a minute, it'll keep you going. It truly will.
Do what Xavier did and read Made for This, the lessons in leadership, legacy, and living unapologetically. She is DeAngela Burns-Wallace. DeAngela, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe. This was so much fun.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about DeAngela and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.